And we will start by welcoming you to the Deeper Dive. I'm Diane Alps. I'm with the Cabrillo Marine Aquarium, and I welcome all of you. Of course, the Deeper Dive webinar series was kind of born from the Cabrillo Whale Watch Naturalist Program, which is a 50-year program, a partnership between the Cabrillo Marine Aquarium and the Los Angeles chapter of the American Cetacean Society, who joined forces, as I said, 50 years ago, to train naturalists to go out on boats and talk about whales and engage kids and bring their knowledge to the public. And that continues today. And we are really excited to be starting up our next season. I believe we're actually our 52nd season in October, the first Tuesday of October. So mark your calendars, everybody. Just show up at the Cabrillo Marine Aquarium on the first Tuesday of October. I don't know why I said the 7th. Is it actually the 7th? That would be kind of weird. But the first Tuesday of every October, we start our program at the Cabrillo Marine Aquarium. Mm-hmm. So we welcome you. And so we are going to turn it over now to Jim DePompe, the programs director at the Cabrillo Marine Aquarium. Thanks for joining us tonight, Jim, and thanks for supporting Deeper Dive.
Oh my goodness. Thank you, Diane, and thank you, Bill, for being here tonight. I'm very excited for your talk about the porpoises and bottlenose dolphins up in San Francisco. Very, very excited. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here tonight. For all of our local attendees, Cabrillo Marine Aquarium is having a few big events coming up. One is, if you missed our life-size inflatable whales, we are going to be inflating them again on May 21st. So come on down and check out a life-size gray whale, a life-size humpback whale, a life-size blue whale, and a life-size baby gray whale. That's right. All four of them will be inflated in the grassy area, and we'll be able to go inside the whales as well. So come on down. It's free. Just go ahead, and I believe there's a reservation, but you can just show up that day as well. That's totally fine. Our next big event.
What date is that?
May 21st.
Woohoo!
Yeah. It's also Endangered Species Day. May 20th is Endangered Species Day. So we're celebrating Endangered Species Days with our whale inflatables. And we'll have whale information and things like that about the migration of the gray whales and blue whales, and not the migration of blue whales, but information about blue whales and things like that as well. So we'd love to have you down there or down here. Also, June 1st is our Grunion Fishtival. We have a couple Grunion runs coming up in May, but June 1st is our Fishtival. And it's going to be a fun evening with Grunion activities and things like that. I know it's not whales, but they're fish and they're really cool. So if you don't know what a Grunion is, come on down to a Grunion run. Search Grunion run or go to the Cabrillo website and look up Grunion run there as well. We've had some really good Grunion runs. We're looking forward to another one. I'm going to turn it back over to cetaceans and cool marine mammals with my friends, both at Cabrillo and at ACS, and also up north in San Francisco. So thank you so much. And I'm looking forward to the talk tonight. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jim. Boy, the Grunion runs this season have been off the hook. So I'm looking forward to more of them. Just complete beaches full of Grunion. It's been pretty mind-blowing. So really, really excited about that. And so I believe we are going to get an update from ACSLA after the meeting. So hang on tight, and we will hear all about our local chapter of the American Cetacean Society, the other host of our program, after the session. So with that, we are going to introduce our awesome speaker tonight. I'm really looking forward to hearing once again from Bill Keener, with the Marine Mammal Center up in Sausalito. And Bill is, as you heard, going to talk about the sex life of harbor porpoises and the travels of bottlenose dolphins, both of which kind of connect down here. Well, I don't know about the harbor porpoises, but it's just really fascinating and interesting. But there's a really great connection to bottlenose dolphins. But Bill, you were saying that you started the Marine Mammal Center in the 70s?
Yes, it was established in 75, and a couple of years later, I got there. I'd already been starting in high school. I'd been a vet tech, and so a veterinary assistant, and so I was already interested in animals and what was going on. But then when the Marine Mammal Center started, I started volunteering right when it was really young, and my career path took me out of there. But then more recently, I've returned just to, with a couple of partners of mine, to bring cetacean field research as another component of what the Marine Mammal Center does, because basically they're the largest marine mammal hospital in the world, focused on rescuing pinnipeds. But, understanding what's going on in the wild in the cetaceans in your local area is also important. And that's what we're bringing to it. And so we're studying, several species.
Absolutely. Well, you can go ahead and start sharing your screen. And that's
all right. Let's see. It says I cannot.
And there we go. You should be able to now.
All right. I will do it. And let me just get this thing going, and we'll get rolling. There we go.
Excellent.
Okay.
All right.
And I just wanted to make sure everybody knew, and I've got this at the end too, my email address. So use it. If you've got questions later you think of after the program, please just go ahead and write to me, keenerb@tmmc.org. And I'm happy to try to get information for you guys. So don't let the fact that we've, are all trying to sort of talk tonight, it doesn't just have to be then. Anytime is fine. So
before you get started, Phil, I was going to tell our attendees tonight about our format. So as we've been doing with the deeper dive, we're going to do a couple of little vignettes and have questions in between. So this is throughout Bill's talk, pop your questions into the Q&A. It works best if you can pop it into the Q&A instead of the chat. You can chat with everyone. All the attendees can see if you chat in the chat box, but questions for Bill should go in the Q&A. And then once he's done talking about small sections, we'll jump in and do some questions. So please do. We look forward to hearing from you. And with that, I'm going to turn off my camera and look forward to your talk. Thank you, Bill. Okay.
Sure. Yeah, you bet. So in San Francisco, the species that we're studying, the cetaceans, are harbor porpoise, bottlenose dolphin, gray whale, which was actually, I photographed one in the bay today underneath the Golden Gate Bridge, and humpback whales, which were also in the bay today. This is the season right at the end of the northbound migration of the gray whales, when the humpbacks will overlap with these gray whales in San Francisco Bay. And I'm coming from a place of back in the 70s when I started studying marine mammals. There were no cetaceans in San Francisco Bay, zero. In fact, I went out many times. I was a whale watch naturalist for a while. We'd go out to the Farallones, and we saw cetaceans out there, but never in San Francisco Bay. And so it's been a huge change to see 4 cetaceans in my lifetime now starting to use San Francisco Bay. And they're all there for different reasons, different species for different reasons. And today we're just going to talk about the top 2, the harbor porpoise, and we'll start with the bottlenose dolphin. And people ask, okay, so what's the difference between porpoises and dolphins? And when I started actually studying them, there was no difference in the sense that they use the words for either one, like porpoise could mean a dolphin or dolphin could mean porpoise. So it was very confused early on, but now scientists have split them apart, and there's these small, cool water porpoises, and then the larger temperate and tropical water dolphins, like the bottlenose dolphin that we see. So we have porpoises in San Francisco, the Dulles porpoise offshore, and harbor porpoise near shore. And then what we share from the LA area is the coastal bottlenose dolphin, which we'll be getting into. But so one of the things is just understand where the words come from. Porpoise comes from porcus piscis, pigfish. So they kind of look piggy and fish-like, I guess, to Aristotle. And so that's what they ended up calling them. And dolphin is from the Greek word instead of Latin. So it's delphin. And then if you were to sort of look at them in the ocean, you guys don't get to see much or anything in the way of harbor porpoises down there, but they really don't start their range in California until Morro Bay is when you can really more dependably see them. But this is what they look like compared to bottlenose dolphins. They're not much to look at above the water, little triangular dorsal fins that aren't very conspicuous compared to bottlenose dolphins. And so their story is one where we've seen this tremendous change, and it really started in 1983. So before 1983, all the coastal bottlenose dolphins were south of Point Conception, so Santa Barbara about down to Ensenada, Mexico. And of course, there's dolphins that go all the way around Baja, but they're a little different stock, a little different genetically distinct dolphin. But these ones that are on our coast started in 83. And then what happened in 83? I actually remember it. There was a big El Nino year. The water warmed up. And with that warm water, dolphins it was facilitating their movement north. So they came up to Monterey Bay in that year. And then when the water cooled, they didn't go back. Some of them stayed. They learned how to navigate, find food, and they stayed in Monterey and sort of have another little colony there. And then in the years since, they've moved up towards San Francisco around 2007, 8. And now we believe that their sort of normal range is somewhere in Sonoma County up to maybe Sea Ranch. And who knows where they're going to end up, because we're in a world of climate change, and it's affecting these bottlenose dolphins for good and for ill. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So these are some of the earlier pictures. Like this one on the picture on the left is from 2008 with Alcatraz Island in the background. This is the first picture I ever saw of a dolphin in San Francisco Bay. And I went, what? We got to look at this. So that's when we started a study within a couple of years and really started tracking these bottlenose dolphins, because we were trying to figure out where they were coming from. And we saw them surfing at Mavericks all of a sudden up in Northern California. And we could see them from the Golden Gate Bridge. I spent a lot of time on the Golden Gate Bridge doing harbor porpoise research. And then some days, bottlenose dolphins started showing up and I could look straight down on them. So that was kind of amazing. And then over time, we were able to get photographs, and this is San Francisco here, and the Golden Gate Bridge is in here, Marin counties to the north. And we would see them sort of all over the place, and they would go into the bay and then come out. And so we just all of a sudden by 2010 had dolphins pretty much everywhere around San Francisco Bay. As a complete and unexpected change for us. And not only just adult dolphins going by, but we saw calves with these fetal folds. And I assume everybody knows what fetal folds are. That's when the little stretch marks from when a baby's has been, in the womb and is born, and these stretch marks last for a couple months, 2 or 3 months. And this is a sure sign of neonates. So we're getting dolphins born in San Francisco, not just traveling up visiting. And then the first thing you do with bottlenose dolphins, it's a standard technique, is I try to identify the individuals. Who are they? So we started a photo ID effort, and using our team and spending a lot of time from shore mostly. We can go out in boats and do it as well, but we gathered a lot of citizen scientists to help us too. We were able to put together a pretty good catalog of these bottlenose dolphins just based on their unique dorsal fin silhouettes. And so one of the things we found out was that we might see a dolphin, this is Spider here, that was named by the researchers in Monterey Bay, because this animal was in Monterey Bay before it came to San Francisco. But before that, it was in Los Angeles, where it was known as Bozo for some reason. I'm not sure who named it Bozo down there. But anyway, so they're all part of our catalog. It's really all our animals in the coast of California, not just, it doesn't belong to any one area, because these guys really travel around. And it's amazing what citizen science can do. Here's a person that sent me this picture, and she was on a beach in Half Moon Bay, was taking a picture of someone, and a dolphin goes by, and that dolphin's extremely easily recognizable. It's an old male, probably 40-year-old male named Taba, that has been seen all over the state of California, from San Diego all the way here. And so we now have a catalog of 120 adult dolphins. Now, there's even more dolphins because there's juveniles and calves that don't have marks on their dorsal fins. But at least we know we've got 120 different adults in the area, which is quite a bit considering there's only probably 650, maybe 700 all told in the state of California. That's it. It's not a big population of these genetically distinct coastal dolphins that really don't go very far offshore. A few have been seen offshore. We've had some go out to the Farallon Islands, 25 miles offshore. They came right back onto the shore. And there's some indication from researchers in Southern California, like Madalena Biartzi, who's seen some of the coastal dolphins out towards the Channel Islands, but it's not common, and they like to hug the beach. So this is our little discovery curve, meaning we starting in 2007 was the first photo we were able to go back and find. And then we've just had this sort of steady increase. And I thought it was flattening off for a couple of years, but now it's picked up again. And I don't know what number we're going to end with, but we're 120 and still moving up. And we've had some real interesting dolphins in San Francisco, because we've had one that stayed for 3 years by itself. It was a loner dolphin, which is really unusual. It's not unknown around the world. They've had this dolphins that sort of split off. They're very social normally. And this one split off by itself and hung out in San Francisco Bay for about 3 years before it left. And we finally did get a photo of it. It seems to be outside socializing normally with its friends, but this is what we would see. We'd see a single dolphin with the San Francisco skyline in the background for a couple of years there. And one of the most interesting things we've been able to do is share our catalog with all the researchers to our south. So we're just the northern end of the range, but there are multiple sets of researchers that have worked on Santa Barbara, Los Angeles, Madalena, and Biartzi, I mentioned, with Ocean Conservation Society, who works on them in the Santa Monica Bay. And then there's people who've done work down in Corona del Mar, Orange County, and a big study by NOAA in the San Diego area. And they even went down into Baja, into Ensenada, to look at them. So we compared our catalogs with all these, and we're writing a paper right now on what we found. And so what we found is that if you were to map the movements of we've got 84 dolphins that we're focusing on. And of those 84, they were in the 1980s, they were only seen in Southern California. By the 90s, they were in Monterey Bay. By the 2000s, they were still in Monterey Bay, but they'd sort of left Southern California mostly. By the 2010s, meaning the last 10 years, they just exploded in our area, and they're just all up and down our coast. So that's 84 of the dolphins that are known. Now, there's hundreds others that we don't see that are probably stay in Southern California or stay in Monterey Bay. Although Monterey Bay and San Francisco share 97% of our catalogs, meaning they're going back and forth to Monterey Bay. It's only a 2 or 3 day journey, but it's more like a month to get down for them to reach, say, LA or San Diego. Nevertheless, when we compared our catalogs, over 1/3, 34% of our catalog, those animals had been seen and photographed in the Santa Monica Bay. So we really do share the same wildlife. And here's a case study just to look at it, a little deeper dive, as Diane would say, for this particular animal, which had a really complex history. There's all these arrows going this way and that. So to unpack that, let's take a look. This is Smooch, and Smooch was named by someone in Monterey Bay, and is probably pretty old, pretty old. These dolphins can live 50, 60 years, but she's 38 at least. And now she was photographed when she was 38 years ago. But the thing is that she was probably, she could have been 10 years old at the time. So she could be 48 easily. Anyway, she's a presumed female. She's been seen with calves, right associated with her dependent calves. So she hasn't been biopsy darted for DNA analysis, but we're certain she's a female. And she's changed her dorsal fin profile over the years. You can see this is a new notch right at the bottom that didn't exist here in 2001, but by 2012, she showed up with a new notch. So you've got to sort of be careful and really compare these silhouettes carefully, because the marks do evolve over time. But her story is that she was first photographed in San Diego in 1984. And then she was seen in Santa Barbara. Well, she was in San Diego probably till 88, but the next year she had traveled to Santa Barbara. And this sort of white image, she didn't turn white. This is just a negative. They were using film in those old days, not digital. So they actually were using the negatives at the time for comparison catalogs. And then the next year, remember, but after this period in the 80s, there was already dolphins up in Monterey Bay. So Smooch traveled to Monterey Bay and lived there for a few years, then came back down to Santa Barbara by 99, and then all the way down to Ensenada, Mexico, where she was photographed in the year 2000. And then she kind of pretty quickly, she turned around and within 1 year was in Santa Monica Bay. So right off your coast, and then was disappeared for about 10 years and showed up in San Francisco by 2012. And so she's been seen a few times. I photographed her there as well. So this is like a pretty amazing story that these animals will really travel a lot. This is very different than bottlenose dolphins on the East Coast that'll stay, say, Sarasota, Florida, in the Sarasota Lagoon system, Sarasota Bay. They will stay their entire lives in one estuarine system. But this is obviously very different in California. They're running around looking for different food resources. It's very changeable, variable. Ocean conditions in California. We've got El Niños and marine heat waves to contend with. So they really seem to be much more mobile. And then we were sent this photo. So I was going, wait a second. This photo, these are evergreen trees. And sure enough, it's from the evergreen state. This is from Washington State. And this dolphin is one I know. This is a dolphin that's hung off Southern California before moving to the Bay Area. This is Miss. And she's now established a new long distance record with her and a couple of her companions because in 2017, she blew right past the state of Oregon. No one saw her. And they, of course, they weren't looking for bottlenose dolphins. They're not primed to do that. And she ends up off Seattle in 2017. And we're not quite sure what's happened to her, whether, that she's never reappeared back in the Bay Area. So we're just not quite sure whether she's just up there in this huge area of the Salish Sea, Puget Sound. And anyway, that's sort of some amazing news that we're going to be announcing in this paper as well, is this how far these guys can go. And if they get a chance, the ones from Southern California can end up all the way up in the Canadian border. So one of the things that has happened because these dolphins are moving north is they're having an effect on the marine community there in a couple different ways. First of all, we've been seeing them interact with harbor porpoises, and it's not necessarily a good thing for the porpoises because these dolphins are much bigger. This is sort of more of a scale that you'd see a porpoise, like 150, 60 pounds, several hundred pounds for these big bottlenose dolphins. And there's actually been papers written about porpoiside in California, meaning harbor porpoises being killed by coastal bottlenose dolphins. And every year we do get some on the beach. Now, remember, there's thousands of porpoises, so it's not really affecting their population overall, but certainly dolphins have the ability to move porpoises out of an area. And there have been acoustic studies in Monterey Bay where they've proven that porpoises will either go silent or they'll move out of an area where dolphins are. They don't want to be echolocating a lot near dolphins because it'll attract the dolphins and they don't want them around. So remember, this is what I showed you before about these dolphins moving up from Southern California. But at the same time, what they're doing is they're running into a huge number, tens of thousands of harbor porpoises from about Morro Bay north, really is where they really are. I mean, they can come down to Point Conception, but in our area, it's probably 7,000 just in my local San Francisco Bay area. So there's a lot of porpoises. And what's happened is that they do kill them sometimes. And we'll see this on the beach. So this is a harbor porpoise where if you were to measure these little, the distance between these little streaks, which are tooth rake marks, they're about 1 centimeter wide. And that's exactly the intertooth distance of an adult bottlenose dolphin. And they've dug into this a little bit through photo ID and looking at the ages of these dolphins. And they're apparently the perpetrators, or porpoises, as my colleague Tom Jefferson will say, are all young male dolphins, usually males that aren't fully adult and they don't have a full social life. They don't have access to females yet for reproduction. And they could be frustrated. They definitely have testosterone. And we see this kind of porpoiside happening in our area in the summer when you would expect their testosterone to be a little bit more ramped up. So it's kind of an interesting thing. It's not a competition thing. They don't consume or eat these, but they beat them up. And the main theory that we're operating under is that it's some sort of frustration and they're just taking it out. And it could be a sexual frustration on the smaller porpoises. So kind of an interesting thing happening. But another way that the dolphins are affecting the marine resources up here is that they're feeding on new food. So they're coming up and they're feeding. These are pictures I've taken where they're feeding on big salmon right in San Francisco Bay. And so they're not getting that in San Diego or Los Angeles, but they certainly can get it up here. And, further north, if they get up to Puget Sound, there's definitely lots and lots of salmon that the killer whales would rather have than probably give it to the newly arrived bottlenose dolphins. So we'll have to see how all this plays out over time. But the point is that definitely our dolphins are all the same, and really they connect and sort of weave together our coasts. I mean, we think of ourselves as Northern California and Southern California, but the dolphins don't care. It's just all one coast to them, and all a place where they can find resources, where they can have calves, and where they've learned to navigate. So let's pause there for some questions. Why don't we, Diane?
That sounds like a great idea. We definitely have some questions. Thank you so much. I've got a bunch of questions, but let's start. Mary asks a question unrelated to our talk. So I'm going to ask her for hers first. She was reflecting back to when you mentioned that you went out today, and she asked if you could show us a picture of a picture that you took today of the gray whale on the Golden Gate Bridge.
Let's see. Well, I think let me see if I can do that.
I'd have to, if you want to be, or maybe after.
I'd have to stop this. Let's see how I can do that. Yes, I'm gonna open my Adobe. This is it right here. So this is right under the Golden Gate Bridge. So the pictures I was taking that day, which I will show you, was that we have a new boat that we just got. This boat, this is called the Nova, and the Marine Mammal Center just acquired it recently for the specific purpose of disentangling whales, to be able to have a high-speed, faster boat that can zoom out and be able to find whales that may be entangled. And so I was photographing that as well. And then this gray whale came right. So this is under the bridge. There, the bridge is on the left. And the whale came right in here. And that's when I was able to photograph it. So this is the back. This is what it looked like. And I'm standing on shore in San Francisco. And look at it, it's got this really interesting patterning here. So I'm going to try to compare this with other gray whale photos that we've taken in the past. And you may know that gray whales are experiencing an unusual mortality event. A lot of them have died over the last few years. So what happens is we don't normally see a lot of gray whales in San Francisco Bay, but they come in and they hang out for, instead of a day or two like normal, where they would start back their migration again, pause for a day or two and then start it up. They'll stay for days, weeks at a time. We've had one for over a month there. And so that's not a good thing, because they're hungry. they don't get a lot of food in San Francisco Bay. They need to really get to the Arctic for their food, or at least further north than San Francisco. And some of them are getting killed by ships in the bay because they're just hanging out in the shipping lanes right in the middle of the bay. So it's not a good situation. It's something we're concerned about. And but that's why I was taking the pictures today, because I want to see who is this guy, if there's a way to figure it out. Anyway, so that's that.
And a great boat. Congratulations.
Yeah,
the Marine Mammal Center. And congratulations on your kind of circling back and, officially bringing this research project to the Marine Mammal Center. They're really expanding their footprint now, like you mentioned, with the disentanglement as well. So that sounds like good things are happening at the Marine Mammal Center as well. Joshua asks about the bottlenose, our tertiates here. What causes the notches?
So that's a really good question. So it happens naturally. It's not something that's anthropogenic, and that's not something human caused. Particularly in the males, it's a rough and tumble life out there. They'll fight each other, sort of beat each other up. They're curious. They rub up against piers and rocks and all kinds of things. And it's a pretty thin membrane, that trailing edge of the dorsal fin. So they could get it. Little tiny nicks will grow over time into larger notches. And so it's all natural. It's just part of their life. It's just it's like getting calluses on a human. Your hands will show it after a long time in the environment.
Excellent. Thank you. Jean asks if there are any citizen scientists who take bottlenose photos, coastal bottlenose photos. Is there a place that we should be submitting them?
So in Northern California, what I do is I tell people to put them into. We have a website link specifically for this purpose on the Marine Mammal Center website for our area. Now, what we'd really like to do is to get things going all coast-wide. And one of the ways we may try doing that is to use the Whale Alert app, which you can download for free on your phone. And that's, I know in sort of off Santa Barbara Channel, a lot of people are using that because there's that acoustic buoy that's part of the Whale Safe program in the Channel area. And people put in whale sightings, but you can also put in dolphins, you can put in photos. But so what I'd like to do is we're actually trying to talk to researchers right now about exactly that thing. There's a man named Dennis Kelly who used to teach in Orange County, and he's tried to lead one day sort of dolphin watches where everybody goes out to the headlands and counts the dolphins in a day. And so that's something that has happened in Southern California, but not in Northern California. So we're kind of trying to weave all this together. So right now, I can't tell you an exact place to send it to, but I will contact Madalena Biarzi, who's doing work in Santa Monica Bay, and talk to her about it.
We were also putting together like an iNaturalist to be able to gather the photos as a place, but everything has their limitations until.
The thing is to really be able to have the data into a catalog where you can it's useful, where you can use it, like, oh, so-and-so is moving up the coast, or this is the 50th time we've seen this one, this must be a resident here. So it's valuable to use that information. So it's all good scientific information, but right now we're just not really in a position to handle sort of the Southern California stuff. I'm dealing with the whole Bay Area and north, so we do have that covered. But it's a really good question, and something that we'll work on.
So we will make sure and follow up. Good question. Very good question. Jody's asking, do you ever use the rake marks on their bodies for identifying individuals?
We don't, because those rake marks fade. And so unless it's a severe scar, I've seen some severe scars we use, but those scars are from probably a line entanglement or something like that, where it's really torn into the skin and it's created a big rupture, but not these rake marks. You just can't. I mean, I could use them. Like I go out one day and then 2 days later, I see the same dolphin. I can say, oh yeah, it's got the rake marks on it, but we don't use that. The gold standard is to use the trailing edge silhouette of the dorsal fin. That's what we're trying to stick with.
Erlinda is asking if the movement of the coastal bottlenose dolphin is related to weather patterns such as La Nina, El Nino, and water temperature.
Well, so yes and no. So they can handle colder water. I mean, so in other words, when the El Nino went away in 1983 and water temperatures cooled, these dolphins didn't seem to be bothered at all. It's all about food for them and resources, a place to have a sheltered beach, places to find food on a regular basis. That's really important to them. So they can actually go against, the temperatures. They can go south or north. However, it's when the water temperatures go warm that they make it easy for them to travel north. And so that's when that happens. So we find the northward travel is during marine heat waves, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they will all have to come back south just because the weather changes again. So we'll see. That's why I'm saying that climate change, overall long-term climate change, is going to push this species as well as many others poleward.
That's a really good point. And so it's like they kind of ride the thermocline, if you will, right? They kind of ride that warm water mass in a way.
And I guess another point to make here is that I try not to talk in terms of a range shift for them. It's really a range expansion. So in other words, it's not like they had to leave San Diego to come up to Northern California. It's that there's probably actually even more of them, and their range is expanding. So they still have a range in Ensenada to San Diego at the southern end, but now their northern end is just getting farther and farther up the coast.
Tamara had a good follow-up question to that. Based on warmer water temps and the bottlenose, kind of impacting our harbor porpoise, do you think the harbor porpoise would move north and maybe shift their range?
Oh, I think that's a super good question. And it's very clear from the temperatures that they can handle. They just don't, that's why they don't come around south of Point Conception. If the water is too warm and it doesn't give them the kind of food they want, they don't really compete even with food with the bottlenose dolphins. The little porpoises don't even have teeth they can bite these fish in half, but they just swallow them whole, little bitty fish like anchovy or herring up north. So I think it's very possible that warm water ultimately is going to push harbor porpoises north. We haven't really seen it starting in our area yet, but it certainly could happen. It's something NOAA's talking about. They run overflights to count porpoises along our coast, and they're wondering if that's going to happen.
Wow, interesting. Oh, great question. And Teresa, this is I think our last in our bottlenose area here. That Teresa's asking if there are any theories about the historical range of West Coast bottlenose.
Yes. I didn't get into that because that's a whole complicated discussion. But yes, so the first thing I do when I'm trying to study a species is you got to ask, what did the first peoples here? What was their relationship? What was their knowledge? So what were the first peoples doing? What were the here in our area, the Native Americans were Miwoks, and they had constructed in Emeryville, which is right across from San Francisco on the bay. And there's actually a street that is a big sign on Interstate 80. You can go by near Berkeley, and it says Shell Mound Avenue. Well, that Shell Mound was the midden mound of the Miwoks there for 2,000 years, from about 700 BC to 1300 AD, when it finally stopped being used. And this thing was massive. It was 50 feet high. It was acres. And so the University of California biologists, when this whole shell mound was being destroyed for industrial advancement in the 1920s, it's now an IKEA, they went through and they counted and looked at all the bones. And there are small numbers of bottlenose dolphin bones in that shell mound, even though certainly when Europeans came into the area, like Captain Scammon, he commented on the harbor porpoises in San Francisco Bay, never mentioned bottlenose dolphins, even though bottlenose dolphins had been seen in Monterey Bay. So we don't really know what's happened, but it looks like bottlenose dolphins have actually been up the coast before, but then something happened, and then they ended up only in Southern California for probably hundreds of years. So it's kind of an interesting story, and I would love to dig even further into it, literally and figuratively.
On that same note, in your diggings, what what do you think the relationship with the offshore bottlenose and how?
Oh, that's another good question. Yeah, I didn't. That's another thing. So the complexity here is that the bottlenose dolphins we've been talking about are just one genetic ecotype. There's the other one is many more in terms of the population offshore, and they don't mix. They might see each other, but they don't breed together. That's why they're genetically distinct. And there's lots of bottlenose dolphins, and they can go up further north off Oregon and Washington. And one sighting has been in British Columbia a few years ago. So those dolphins are a little bit different. They actually look a little different, a little darker, a little tougher, and they have different food and so forth. They have a different culture in a sense. And so we don't know as much about them because it's so easy to study these bottlenose dolphins. Nobody has a catalog of the dorsal fins of offshore dolphins. So a lot is going to remain to be learned out there, but they seem to be genetically distinct. And so I don't think they're going to be mixing. And it actually causes me some concern. If you normally look at a population of 650, say 700 animals, that would be normally a cause for concern, right? That's like not that many breeding females, maybe a few hundred and at most. And that would normally under, say, like the IUCN Red List, that would be vulnerable at least. But what's happened is, because the way the United States government handles and manages these stocks, there's lots of dolphins offshore, bottlenose dolphins. So they go, well, they're not threatened because there's so many. In fact, they're worldwide. They're all over the world. So we're not as worried about them. Well, I am, because it's a genetically distinct group in California that's off our coast.
Excellent. I think that's a good wrap up for this section, and I am going to turn it back over to you.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Then we'll get going on talk about harbor porpoises, and this is the X-rated portion of the evening. So harbor porpoises are so different than bottlenose dolphins. I mean, they're not only just way smaller, but look at this. Their average lifespan is 10 or 11 years. 90% of them are gone by the time they're age 12. And that puts them into a real different category when you're trying to talk about reproduction and how many calves you can have over a female's lifetime. And that probably had these effects on their mating tactics and their reproductive strategies, and that we're just sort of unraveling right now. So harbor porpoises, when I started looking in the bay in the 70s, there were none there. They came back around 2008, and the bay's a lot cleaner than it used to be. So, in a way, some of this is an environmental success story. I think it's a different story for the bottlenose dolphins, but certainly for the harbor porpoises, it's reclaiming habitat we know they used to have, because they were seen and many times by people who were alive in the 30s. They go, oh yeah, they were there, and then they left. And we think really World War II had a lot to do with it. There was a submarine net stretched across the bay, keeping them from moving in and out. There's the military shipping, and the even building the Golden Gate Bridge. The bridge was built in the 30s, and they were blasting black powder, in the ground and just sending shockwaves through this area. Porpoises do not like that. They're very sensitive acoustically, and so they were gone for about 60 years. So they're back, which is great. And then we found that we could study them. We could look at them, particularly from the Golden Gate Bridge, and look at their foraging activities. And these are kinds of pictures that nobody else really anywhere in the world could take at the time. Drones hadn't really started their rise to be a more regular tool of cetacean biologists. So now you can sort of get some drone pictures, but we have the Golden Gate Bridge, fortunately. And so what we were seeing was not just feeding activity, but these mothers and calves. And the mothers and calves were, we were going, wow, some of these young are neonates. We actually saw fetal folds on some of these little calves going, these calves are being born here in the bay now. And so we weren't even sure how often these mothers were giving birth. They had done some studies before in California, and it was complicated. They looked at porpoises in Monterey Bay and San Francisco, and it looked like between 1 and 2 years. So maybe every other year they're having a calf. But they know that on the East Coast, because they've done those studies in the Gulf of Maine, is that the females give birth every single year. So that means, so they get to be 3 or 4 years old before they're sexually mature. Then they're pregnant and lactating their entire adult lives until they die at, say, 11 or 12 years old. That's really hard on a small mammal, but that's what they do. And they're sort of like the phrase about them is life in the fast lane. They, sort of mature young and die young. So I spent a lot of time on the Golden Gate Bridge looking at it. And it turned out to be an amazing wildlife observatory up there, so where we could really see some of these behaviors. And so finally in 2010, I took this picture. And this was the first one where we realized that maybe there's some mating going on, because I took it home, put it into my computer and went, what is this? And no one had ever seen a picture like this before, but that's a penis. This dolphin, porpoise is probably about 4.5 feet long. So that's about an 18-inch penis, which is way outsized for an animal this size. I mean, bottlenose dolphins are much bigger. They have penises that are like a half or third of the size. And so you're just going, what is happening with these animals? Well, you got to go back to evolution and what kinds of penises do they have? And there's a few different kinds of penises out there in the mammalian world. I had to learn this, which is you've got what humans and horses have, which is they're sort of pneumatically, blood pressure creates an erection. You've got ones that are more like with bones inside, like are carnivores, like dogs or raccoons and bears, and walruses, which and pinnipeds that have huge bones that are able to maintain the shape of the penis. But dolphins and cows and pigs are different. They've got these kinds that are what are called fibroelastic. They sort of keep their shape, but they don't have a bone in them. And they can be very quickly erected and pulled back into the body almost instantaneously. So when you start looking at cetacean sex, you find things in books like this. And this is a fantasy that someone's having of this beautiful mating out there in the ocean. No one's actually photographed this, and they actually don't think this is actually real. But people also think, more modern scientists think, well, you're weightless out there. See, there's got to be a variety of positions. There's no characteristic way they would do it. But the truth is far from that. And so here's a picture of actual mating dolphins from, I think this is off Newport. In Southern California. My buddy Mark Weber took this a few years ago. And so here you've got these two, it looks like a mirror, but these are actually mating common dolphins, and with a third looking on. And so the other thing to realize about harbor porpoises is that they have enormous testes. In fact, my favorite scientific paper is megatestes. How about that? So they have testes as large as a 50-foot fin whale's testes in actual size, like the size of a kind of a football. That's in the summer. During the winter, when the harbor porpoises aren't breeding, it actually shrinks up to be pretty small. But then it grows really large again in the summer. And so there's just a lot of sperm. And so they think what's going on with these guys is that instead of having like bottlenose dolphins where males will fight each other and trying to sequester females and try to control paternity by being the ones to mate with that female, these porpoises went a completely different evolutionary route. And the prediction for sperm competition is that the sperm are actually battling it out inside the female reproductive tract. So it sounds crazy, but that's the theory. And so these cetacean biologists predicted several years ago, we predict that Harper porpoise males do not fight over females. They produce large ejaculates. They mate with numerous females, many times with the same female. And so we thought, well, we may be the first people in the world to see any of this behavior, to figure out, well, is this just, another fantasy, or is this really reality? So here's what we see. This is a little video I took. That is a mating attempt by a male with a female. And I'm going to show you a different clip here. That's how fast it is. Now I'm going to slow it down. Now you can see that guy's penis. I'll run this again. It's worth doing again. It's hard to see. I've seen this a few times, so takes some use to be able to really see what's happening here. So this male has come up and knocked the female completely clear out of the water, which seems like a crazy strategy, because that's not a very successful copulation there. But we have seen it happen, but 5% of the time, the male is rushing at the female and the female is not receptive. And so she will fling herself out or make it impossible for the male to copulate with her. So this is a typical sort of view where the male shoots out of the water and he actually goes airborne. This is the tip of his penis, which starts way back there, and this female's rolled away. And here's another one where this male's coming up right along the side, trying to penetrate her, but then she's throwing her flukes into the air, and he ends up off to the side here. And here's another one. One of the other things we found out is that we could see a little bit down into the surface of the water, and these males will time their mating sort of run approach to be exactly when she's taking a breath at the surface. Well, the obvious reason for that is that that's the moment right at the surface when she can't go anywhere. She's trapped by gravity. That's the only time she's trapped. If she's down underwater, she can maneuver 360 degrees, but she's kind of heavy for the first time, in that breath cycle when she hits the air. And that's exactly when the males rush alongside. And if you've noticed these pictures that I've been showing you, there's something kind of unusual about this. The males are always on the female's left side. So that's something it took us a little while to realize what was happening. But in fact, we photographed it a lot of times, and 100% of the time, the male approaches the female from her left side. And here he's missing completely, but he's nevertheless attempting on her left side. And so then that just seems crazy, because you think about mammals, and you think about most mammals, land mammals, they'll mount, like a deer. Male deer will come up from behind, mount, get off after a few seconds, but it's just a sort of approach right from behind. And here was definitely this left-sided thing. And even the common dolphins and other dolphins we've seen, bottlenose dolphins, they'll be more, dusky dolphins have been studied in New Zealand. They'll be more sort of mirrored to each other. None of this sort of laterals off to the side thing. So this seemed unique among mammals, not just cetaceans. So in fact, this is one scientific graph from our paper that we wrote about their sex life that I want to show you, because it's so unusual, because you never get to see this. You never get to see that it's 100%. It's usually like some kind of a spectrum. We've got a few, from another position that he might approach, but he contacts her 100% on the left, from the left side. So here's, for instance, a male. This is a female here on the left. Here's a male on the right. So does he approach her and try to copulate from the right? Nope. He comes all the way around and comes up on the left side. So kind of crazy. Here's a copulation. There's a calf right there. The males don't care about the calves. They'll kind of bump into them or knock them off to the side. And so here he is actually, this is a copulation here where the female is cooperating. And then he splits off, he falls out. This only takes 1 to 2 seconds for the full event of the copulation. Here's one where it's non-contact. So here's a male extruding his penis, sort of displaying it to this female on her left side with a calf in between. So it's really very unusual stuff going on. Then we also wanted to look at male-male interactions. Are these males trying to control females? Absolutely not. The closest we've ever seen one is this, where this third adult, we don't know if it's male or female, but it's just looking on the scene and staying out of the way and letting what happens. So really unusual. Now, one of the things we really feel super lucky about is the Golden Gate Bridge. Someone was thinking back in the 1930s when they said, well, let's put it right here at the narrowest area, which is also the deepest area and the most constricted, because out in the ocean, all the harbor porpoises are spread out. In the bay, they spread out too when they go to feed. But right during the time when they exchange, and this is usually around high tide to the beginning of ebb is when I go out, they come together and it's like a big barn dance underneath the Golden Gate Bridge. So it's just like you're out in the country, you're in rural area, and on Saturday night, people come to the dance, and that's where the social activity happens. Well, it happens right under the Golden Gate Bridge. And we've jokingly referred to this as the funnel of love, as all these porpoises are funneled into this area. For times we've seen males sitting sort of there in an area and going after different females, one after the other as they come through, because he knows they've got to come through that area. So it's really interesting to see the fact that here's porpoises are getting back a piece of land. It's really a submarine topography that actually has a positive effect on their social life, on their reproductive success. And so let's think about this left-sided thing again. What could be going on here? And this seems to be unique among mammals. So we had to dig into it a little bit and get some help with some other experts in the field. And so we came up with a bunch of hypotheses like, well, there are asymmetries in all cetaceans, particularly in the odontocetes, these ones with echolocation, because they've got a little bit different way their skull is formed. So one side can be bigger than another. A guy named Jim Dines in Los Angeles has done studies on their pelvic bones. Now, the pelvic bone in a male porpoise turns out to be incredibly important, because even though that bone is floating and you think, well, it's a relict because they don't really have pelvises, it's actually super important because it anchors the muscles that erect the penis. So we look to see, well, maybe there's some left-sided, pelvic bone is bigger than the other. And none of those things really happen. We found flippers. Flippers are bigger in porpoises on one side, the right side's a little bigger, but it's true for females too. So we didn't really think that was it. So then, of course, we're left with looking at the reproductive organs. And then you've got to look, of course, really what's going on here. It's all about the females. And it's really about this millions of years of evolution where males and females are battling for the right to control paternity, control who's going to be able to have their DNA passed along. And so it's really the activity inside the female's body that has really been evolving. And so it turned out that their behavior and anatomy in harbor porpoises is co-evolving in a really unique way in mammals. So here's what, looking down from the Golden Gate Bridge again, you can see that this male's penis is actually a little kind of twisted off to the left here. And that's some of the studies that have been done where they've tried to do these 3D imageries of these porpoise penises. And then, of course, they did the same thing by looking at the female's reproductive tract. And here is a three-dimensional look at it. It's not like a normal straight tube, like more like a dolphin or any normal mammal would be. It's all twisted, and there's actually flaps and folds in there. And they believe these are barriers to the sperm, so that the female, by flexing her body, can change the shape of the inside of her reproductive tract and make it more difficult for a male to be able to be successful in getting his sperm to the cervix and the egg. So, so we wrote a paper that came out a couple of years ago on this whole unique lateralized mating behavior with the male and the female. This is an actual female reproductive tract, and sort of its twisty ways and all these little flaps and folds, which are quite unusual. So these guys have a really unique mating tactics and strategy, and it's probably still evolving over time. And so then we wanted to know, well, is it just San Francisco? Because that was the joke, of course, at the conference as well. San Francisco, of course, weird sex life out there. But of course, when we start really looking, and we're going to write a paper on this because we've been getting pictures from around the world now that we've asked for them. And it's always the same. It's the left-sided mating. The female's 90% of the time throwing her flukes into the air because she doesn't want to have a successful copulation. And so I suspect we're going to see pretty much the same thing. But there's actually a conservation component to this, because people were seeing porpoises fling into the air, and they were excited because there's food in the area. We believe that is not true. We believe it's about mating, and really those areas should be looked at for marine conservation or marine protection areas, because they could be very important to porpoise social life and their reproductive success. Their abundance of their population could depend on areas. And so really you need to relook at these porpoises that you're seeing in the air. They're probably mating, not feeding. And that is about it. So we can have questions now. Diane?
That was fantastic. Excellent. Thank you so much. I'm still blushing a little bit, of course. No, it's a really good, that was just a really, really great presentation.
It's pretty crazy. And I don't do this talk when there's a lot of kids in the room. So
I can imagine. I've shared with you before, but we saw some likely what we have since broken down in talking to you, some mating occurring in the St. Lawrence. We were in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, and we were watching harbor porpoises. And we had, we were watching one at the surface that was about to we could see it coming up and about to surface in front of us. And then just all of a sudden, big blast. And later looking at the pictures and showing you, we could see a little appendage there and a little tip of it.
Well, so I need to get back in touch with you about that. I want.
Oops, I just lost you there for a second.
So
mine or yours, but
all I was saying is, Diane, is that it's worth re-looking at. I'd like to see that again. So
all right, sounds good. I'll send those over to you.
Yeah.
So we do have only a couple questions, but I think everybody's probably still digesting and processing, and we'll get some more here in just a second. Alan asks, what effects have pesticides had on their reproduction and immunity systems?
That's a really good question. One of the interesting things about harbor porpoises in our area is they don't migrate. They do on the East Coast. They'll move to get away from the frozen cold weather up north. But on California, there's different stocks that are non-migratory. There's a Morro Bay stock. There's a Monterey Bay stock. There's a San Francisco stock. And then there's one further north. So one of the interesting things they've been able to do is they take blubber samples to look for pollutants of any kind. And they can tell there's a difference between stocks by the kind of pollutants they're getting in their body. So in San Francisco area, they're getting a little bit more of like some industrial chemicals. Whereas in Monterey, they tend to get agricultural chemicals. And so in particular, the dolphins, bottlenose dolphins in Monterey Bay are famous for having skin problems, skin diseases, because they believe it's all from the pollutant load that's building up in their bodies. So we absolutely think for bottlenose dolphins, it has probably having an effect on their reproduction. I mean, that's been shown in many other species to have an effect. So why wouldn't it be happening if you've got that same load in bottlenose dolphins? And with harbor porpoises, we're just not quite sure. One of the differences between the two is that these harbor porpoises may be having, like here, a little calf with a mom. Maybe every year you might have a calf being born. And remember, this calf, or the mother is maybe, say, 3 or 4. She first gets pregnant. So she say by the time she's 4 or 5, she's got her first calf. And then she's only got 5 or 6 more years, and then she's done. So on an animal like that, with it's really rapid and there's a lot of lactating all the time, she may be able to get rid of some of the pollutant burden through her milk, through lactation. Whereas bottlenose dolphins, they'll breed, a female can go 3 to 5 years. She'll be taking care of a calf. So it's probably a lot harder on the bottlenose dolphins, but this is a little bit of speculation. We don't really know how it's affecting harbor porpoises, but their populations are fine. They've right now, they've never been hunted here, but they did have a bad several years during the 80s when there was gill netting going on, and a lot of them were getting trapped and bycaught. But that has been changed with new regulations about the fishing gear. So their populations are quite healthy in California.
Mary asks if the lifespan of the male harbor porpoise is as short as that of the female.
Yeah, it's the same. It's the same.
Excellent. So Teresa asks if orcas prey on the porpoises in San Francisco Bay, and what are the other predators?
So here's the thing. My dream is to see an orca in San Francisco Bay. For as far as we know, it's never happened. Now, why the transients don't come by and turn in to Pier 39, where there's just tons of sea lions sitting around ready to be, feasted upon, I don't know, but they've never done it. And
with that deep channel. Yeah.
We know that they go by offshore. They just are not turning into the bay. So it's very possible they're taking, this is known in the Salish Sea, up in Puget Sound. So I don't see why they wouldn't, but we have never seen it and just don't have any evidence for it in our area.
Yeah. Natalie asks if, regarding the female throwing the flukes up in the air, would the same behavior potentially apply to bottlenose?
Yes,
she says
certainly.
She sees that behavior.
Yes, but the bottlenose dolphin reproduction and their social life is entirely different. So these porpoises will be very kind of loners. You'll see a mom and a calf, and they're just off by themselves, and they don't need anybody else. Whereas dolphins are this fission fusion society that they're always mixing and into different groups and splitting up and coming back together again. And then males will have male alliance partners, which does not happen in porpoises. Male porpoises tend to just be off on their own. Whereas in bottlenose dolphins, they'll have an alliance partner, a buddy that they'll be with their entire adult lives. And maybe even more than one, might even have a couple. And those 2 or 3 dolphins might try to control a female coming into estrus, into heat. And so it's totally different with bottlenose dolphins. That is not what's happening here with these porpoises. The porpoises are just constantly, the males going out and attempting to copulate with as many females as they can, whereas the bottlenose dolphins have a different kind of strategy, and they're a lot bigger and tougher, both females and males. And so it's a much tougher world in the bottlenose dolphin world. So they're just really different, and it's hard to compare them directly.
Interesting. No, that's great. Great look at the comparison of the two. Verenka is asking if there is work on the reproductive tract of other species of porpoises to see if they have any asymmetry.
So it's hard to get reproductive tracts of all the other animals, but there's my colleague Dara Orbach, who's now a professor at Texas A&M in Corpus Christi. Is her life's mission to do this, and she's working with a woman named Sarah Mesnick at NOAA, at the Southwest Fisheries Science Center in San Diego. And between the two of them, and there's another woman named Patty Brennan. If you look up Patty Brennan, she's famous because she's the one that figured out in ducks, they have spiraled penises. And so all of those 3 women are going to be the ones that are going to figure this stuff out. and they've gotten a pretty good start on it. And they're starting to write papers now about these different kinds of reproductive tracts and what's going on in the cetaceans. But the other porpoise species are the hardest ones to get right now. So they're starting on the easier species and some of the large whales, which are really interesting too. So they're going to figure this stuff out. It's just going to take a little while.
Interesting. So I imagine they've got an alert out to the stranding network to say
they do, but it's worldwide. It's not just the U.S. stuff. So they're working on it.
That's great. That's great. Martine asked if there's any evidence that any other cetaceans engage in leaping behavior as part of a mating behavior or part of a...
Absolutely, they do. They 100%. There's all kinds of leaping behavior happens in lots of dolphin species. Dusky dolphins is the most famous. They're the ones, the high leapers. And yes, so they absolutely do that. Now, so this leaping that I was talking about here was really not so much for display. This was the actual male driving up against the female when she's at the surface. He misses her, and that's why he ends up in the air. It's when the missed copulations is when he ends up. But there's other dolphins that are doing it for display, like to say, see how physically fit I am. I can leap 15 feet into the air.
Mm-hmm. Barbara is asking if there are other small cetaceans seen in your area.
So, well, offshore, so not in the bay. So the only cetaceans that are the ones I mentioned, so the bottlenose dolphin, harbor porpoise, gray whale, humpback whale, and humpbacks are coming in to feed on anchovy inside the bay. So as soon as you go a little bit offshore, though, then you start picking up what you see in Monterey Bay, like Dall's porpoise, northern right whale dolphin, Lissodelphus, Grampus, the Rissos dolphins, and the Pacific white-sided dolphins. So they're all out there. You just got to go out towards the Farallones, maybe 20 miles, to see them.
I think we should get a bus trip and go up to the Farallones. I think that would be a fun.
You don't need to do that. You need to get the bus trip to go to the Golden Gate Bridge, and I'll take you out there.
That's true. That's true.
Show you, because that's the stuff that you can't see anywhere else in the world.
I totally agree. We can make a weekend out of it. I think that would be a lot of fun. Thank you so much, Bill. This was a wonderful presentation and lots and lots of questions. And I'm sure people are going to be talking about this for quite some time. I really appreciate all that you put together and this work that you've been doing. It's fascinating.
Yeah, no, thank you. It's my passion, so I'm happy to share it.
Thank you. We have an update from the Los Angeles chapter president, Louisa Beck. And while we get her piped in, just want to let you all know that we will have our deeper dive in May will feature John Kalamakitis from Cascadia Research. And we're looking forward to his presentation. So save the date. That is the last Tuesday in May. Which is May 31st.
Well, you can ask John about his experience tagging the very first whales in San Francisco Bay a few years ago.
Excellent. We will do that. I can't wait to in the
He's Bay. Awesome. He's the man.
Yeah. He's a large whale guy, but he's done a lot of porpoise work up there as well, hasn't he? I think up in Puget Sound. So let's go ahead and turn it over really quickly to Louisa. Let's see if we can make this work. I'm going to see if we can pipe you in there for just a second. And actually, we will get rid of Bill and I, and you can say a quick hello. Thanks for joining us, Louisa. ACSLA.
Hi. Sorry about that, guys. I had some technical difficulties earlier. I did not mean to be tardy. But I did catch the lecture and it was amazing. And my husband was a little bit, confused when he walked into the room at what he heard. But sure enough, he gets it now. But anyway, I just wanted to give a quick update on some great things that we're doing at ACSLA. We currently just closed our deadline for our applications for research grants. And so over the next month, we will be picking the winners for the 3 grants that we have. We usually have 2 grants. One is the John Haining research grant, and the other one is the Bill Samaras research grant. And then this year we added a 3rd research grant called the Corinne Sutherland memorial research grant, which we just started with some of the members of our gray whale census. And she was a gray whale census volunteer for many years. And, with some local volunteers and her family, they put together some money to offer that grant for gray whale research. So just some, update on what we're doing over here at ACSLA. And at our next deeper dive webinar, we should have those awardee names that were chosen. So anyway, that's all that we have going on over here. Thanks, Anne.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thanks for the update. And as always, thank you so much for supporting our deeper dive webinar series. So I think with that, we will wish you all well. Thanks again to Bill Keener for joining us tonight with 2 fascinating topics and being able to continue our connection to the great world of marine mammals and whales and joining us on taking a deeper dive. Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.